When my wife, Sarah, and I first stepped into our new home in Willow Creek Estates, it felt like we had finally arrived. For years, we had dreamed of owning a place where we could put down roots, a cozy house with a little garden, somewhere peaceful yet lively enough to feel like part of something bigger. Willow Creek seemed perfect. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, kids played basketball in driveways, and neighbors exchanged warm smiles as they walked their dogs. It was everything we'd hoped for. The day we closed on the house, we were handed a thick packet by a cheerful woman representing the Homeowners Association, or HOA. She called herself Margaret and assured us the rules inside were there to maintain the beauty and harmony of the neighborhood. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Everyone wants their community to look nice, right? So I flipped through the pages casually while Sarah skimmed over them more carefully. There were guidelines about mailbox styles, approved paint colors for doors, restrictions on lawn ornaments, and even rules about how high grass could grow before it became a violation. Honestly, it all sounded reasonable enough. Until later, when reality set in. We spent weeks unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and hanging pictures. Every corner of the house slowly started to reflect who we were as a couple. Sarah decorated the living room with her favorite throw pillows, and I hung up some old family photos in the hallway. Outside, I planted a few flowers in the garden, envisioning how colorful they'd be once spring rolled around. Life felt good. We were settling in, and for the first time in years, things felt stable. But one evening, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee and watching the sunset, something caught my eye. Across the street, a man was arguing with another neighbor. From what I could gather, the dispute was over a small wooden fence someone had installed without permission from the HOA. The tension between them was palpable, and it left me uneasy. Was this really happening here, in our picture-perfect neighborhood? Curious, I asked Sarah about it later that night. She shrugged it off, saying, "People take these rules seriously around here." But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe we hadn't fully understood what we were getting ourselves into. Sure, rules are important, but this seemed different, like the kind of thing that could spiral out of control if you weren't careful. Still, life went on. We continued decorating the house, making it ours. One weekend, Sarah decided to repaint the front door. She picked out a soft shade of blue, thinking it would brighten up the entrance and give the house a fresh look. I helped her finish the job, and afterward, we stood back admiring our work. It looked great, exactly what the house needed. Little did we know, that decision would soon plunge us into chaos. Looking back now, I realize those early days were deceptively calm. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but beneath the neatly manicured lawns and smiling faces lurked a web of rules and regulations waiting to ensnare anyone who stepped out of line, even unintentionally. And unfortunately for us, we were about to learn just how far the HOA was willing to go to enforce its vision of perfection. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. One afternoon, after a long day at work, I pulled into the driveway and noticed something unusual taped to our front door. At first glance, it looked like a flyer or maybe an invitation from a neighbor. But as I stepped closer, my heart sank. It wasn't a friendly note. It was an official letter from the HOA. The envelope was plain white, but the typed words inside carried a tone that felt anything but welcoming. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," it began, "we regret to inform you that your current shutters are in violation of Willow Creek Estates aesthetic guidelines." My eyes scanned the page, trying to make sense of what I was reading. According to Rule 34B, Section C, Paragraph 5, only beige, white, or gray shutters were permitted within the community. Blue, our beautiful blue shutters, were deemed non-compliant. I stared at the letter for a moment, half expecting it to be some kind of prank. Surely, this couldn't be real. Who cared about the color of shutters? Wasn't it more important that we maintained our property and contributed positively to the neighborhood? I shook my head, folded the letter, and walked inside to show Sarah. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of laughing it off like I had hoped, she sighed deeply and said, "Didn't we agree to follow these rules when we bought the house?" She was right, of course. We had signed off on the HOA guidelines during closing, even though neither of us had given them much thought at the time. Still, I couldn't believe they were actually enforcing something as trivial as shutter color. Determined to resolve the issue quickly, I decided to call the HOA president, Margaret. Her name was already infamous among the neighbors for her strict adherence to the rules. When I reached her, I tried to explain how ridiculous the situation felt. "It's just paint," I said, hoping she'd see reason. But her response was cold and unwavering. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson. If everyone picked their own colors, the neighborhood would lose its cohesive look." Her words stung, but I knew arguing further wouldn't help. Reluctantly, I agreed to repaint the shutters over the weekend. Sarah and I headed to the hardware store together, searching for the exact shade of beige approved by the HOA. It took 2 trips and multiple swatches before we finally found the right match. By Sunday evening, the job was done, and the shutters looked fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to think the ordeal was over. Problem solved. Lesson learned. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something about the way the HOA operated didn't sit right with me. Their obsession with minor details seemed excessive, almost obsessive. And while repainting the shutters might have satisfied their demands, for now, I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that they weren't done with us yet. The following Monday, I came home from work to find another envelope taped to our door. My stomach tightened as I tore it open, dreading what I might find inside. This time, the letter informed me that the trim around the newly painted shutters was also non-compliant. Apparently, it didn't match the rest of the houses on the block. I stood there, staring at the paper in disbelief. How could they possibly expect us to keep up with such nitpicky standards? What started as a simple request had spiraled into an endless cycle of scrutiny and correction. Each new demand chipped away at my patience and made me question whether living under the watchful eye of the HOA was worth it. But quitting wasn't an option, not yet, anyway. So I braced myself for whatever came next, knowing full well that this battle was far from over. The more I thought about that second letter from the HOA, the angrier I became. Who did they think they were, micromanaging every detail of our home? It wasn't just about the shutters anymore. It felt personal, like they were deliberately targeting us for no good reason. I couldn't let this go unanswered. Something had to be done. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, hoping to confront them face to face and get some answers. Sarah wasn't thrilled about the idea. "Do you really think it's worth stirring the pot?" she asked cautiously, but I was determined. If they wanted to play hardball, then fine. I'd show up and fight for what I believed was fair. The meeting took place in the community center, a small room with folding chairs arranged in rows. When I walked in, all eyes turned to me. Some neighbors offered polite smiles, but most looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact altogether. At the front of the room sat Margaret, the HOA president, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't look pleased to see me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and cleared my throat. My heart was pounding, but I tried to sound calm and collected. "I'm here today because I have concerns about how the HOA is enforcing its rules," I began. "Specifically, the way my family has been treated feels unfair." Margaret cut me off almost immediately. "Mr. Thompson," she said sharply, "the guidelines exist to maintain consistency in our neighborhood. Everyone is expected to follow them, including you." Her tone made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Consistency is one thing," I replied, "but this isn't about consistency anymore. It's about control. You're nitpicking details that don't matter to anyone except yourselves. How does the color of my shutters or the trim around them affect the value of this neighborhood?" A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One man nodded slightly, as if agreeing with me, but no one spoke up. Margaret glared at me, her expression unreadable. "Willow Creek has standards," she said coldly. "If you can't abide by them, perhaps this isn't the right place for you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was she seriously suggesting we leave our home because of a paint color? The absurdity of it all made me want to laugh or scream. Instead, I sat down, fuming silently while the rest of the meeting continued. As I drove home that night, I replayed the conversation in my head. Margaret's attitude confirmed what I'd started to suspect. The HOA wasn't interested in fairness or logic. They cared only about maintaining their authority, even if it meant bullying homeowners into submission. And worst of all, they seemed to have the support, or at least the silence, of many of our neighbors. Things escalated quickly after that. Word spread about my confrontation at the meeting, and not everyone was sympathetic. Some neighbors whispered behind my back, calling me difficult or argumentative. Others avoided me altogether, pretending not to notice when I waved hello. Even Sarah grew anxious, worried that standing up to the HOA might alienate us further. Then came the vandalism. Late one night, I stepped outside to grab something from the car and froze in shock. Someone had spray-painted "Rule Breaker" in bold black letters across our garage door. The message was crude and unmistakable, a direct attack meant to intimidate us into compliance. I clenched my fists, anger surging through me, but there was nothing I could do except clean it up. Sarah cried herself to sleep that night, and I stayed awake scrubbing the graffiti under the dim glow of a street lamp. As I worked, I noticed lights flickering on in nearby houses, neighbors peeking through their curtains to see what was happening. Not one of them came outside to offer help or even ask if we were okay. That hurt more than the vandalism itself. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt truly alone. But despite the fear and frustration, something inside me refused to give up. I realized that backing down wouldn't solve anything. It would only validate the HOA's behavior. If I let them win, who would stop them from targeting someone else next? No, I couldn't walk away. This wasn't just about me or my shutters anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even if it meant going against the entire neighborhood. And so, I resolved to keep fighting, no matter how hard it got. The tension between me and the HOA began to ripple through the neighborhood in ways I hadn't anticipated. At first, it seemed like a private battle, just me against Margaret and her rigid rules. But as word spread about my resistance, the entire community started taking sides. Some neighbors admired my willingness to stand up to the HOA, while others viewed me as a troublemaker who was rocking the boat. The divide grew wider with each passing day, and soon, Willow Creek felt less like a peaceful suburb and more like a battleground. At first, a few brave souls approached me quietly to offer support. One evening, as I was mowing the lawn, an older gentleman named Tom stopped by to chat. "You're doing the right thing," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "We've all been afraid to say anything, but you're shining a light on what's wrong here." His words gave me hope, but they also made me realize how many people had silently suffered under the HOA's strict rules. It wasn't just me. They were all living in fear of retribution or judgment. But not everyone was sympathetic. Other neighbors avoided eye contact when they saw me, as if being associated with me might put them on the HOA's radar. A woman across the street, who used to wave hello every morning, suddenly pretended not to notice me. Even small interactions at the mailbox became awkward. One day, I overheard two women talking about me at the park. "He's making such a big deal out of nothing," one of them whispered. "It's just paint. Why can't he let it go?" Her comment stung, but it also hardened my resolve. If they thought this was just about paint, they didn't understand the bigger picture. Then came the vandalism, a low blow that crossed the line from passive-aggressive behavior to outright hostility. Late one night, after a long week of work, I stepped outside to grab something from the car. As I walked toward the garage, I froze. Someone had spray-painted "Rule Breaker" in bold black letters across our garage door. The message was crude ugly, and unmistakably meant for us. My stomach churned as I stared at it, anger bubbling inside me. Who would do something like this, and why? I called Sarah outside, and she gasped when she saw it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around herself. "This is getting out of hand," she said softly. "Maybe we should just give in, Matt. Maybe it's not worth it." Her words broke my heart, but I knew backing down wasn't an option. Not now. This wasn't just about shutters or trim anymore. It was about standing up to bullying tactics that had gone unchecked for too long. So instead of giving in, I grabbed a bucket, some soap, and a scrub brush, and spent hours under the dim glow of the street lamp trying to remove the graffiti. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, watching silently as I worked. Not one of them came outside to offer help, or even acknowledge what had happened. That hurt more than the vandalism itself. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt truly unwelcome. The next day, I reported the incident to the police, though I doubted anything would come of it. Without evidence or witnesses, it was unlikely anyone would be held accountable. Still, filing the report felt like taking back a small piece of control. Later, I snapped a photo of the defaced garage door and shared it with a few trusted neighbors who supported me, explaining how far the HOA drama had escalated. Their reactions ranged from shock to outrage, and one couple even offered to install security cameras on their property to monitor suspicious activity near our house. As days turned into weeks, the strain began to wear on Sarah and me. We argued more often, the stress of the situation weighing heavily on both of us. She worried about retaliation or further vandalism, while I obsessed over finding a way to expose the HOA's hypocrisy. Despite the challenges, however, something inside me refused to give up. I realized that walking away wouldn't solve anything. It would only validate their behavior. If I let them win, who would stop them from targeting someone else next? No, I couldn't back down. This fight wasn't just about me or my shutters anymore. It was about proving that fairness mattered, and that no one deserved to be treated this way in their own home. Enough was enough. I couldn't sit back and let the HOA push me around anymore. Their rules, their threats, their selective enforcement. It all felt like a game designed to keep homeowners in line, no matter how unreasonable they were. But I wasn't going to be their next victim. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one, but not with anger or aggression. This time, I'd use facts, logic, and proof to expose their hypocrisy. I started by digging deep into the HOA's bylaws. It was tedious work, poring over pages of dense legal jargon late into the night, but I was determined to find something, anything, that could help me challenge their authority. And then it hit me. Inconsistencies. The HOA claimed to enforce every rule equally, but that wasn't true at all. While they were nitpicking my shutters and trim, other homes in the neighborhood were breaking multiple guidelines without consequence. One house down the street had a bright red front door, which clearly violated the approved color palette. Another neighbor had installed a flagpole in their yard, a big no-no according to the HOA's own rules, and yet nothing had been done about it. Even the mailbox designs varied wildly from house to house, despite strict regulations dictating what was allowed. The evidence was everywhere, plain as day, and it proved exactly what I suspected. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules fairly. They were targeting people selectively, including me. Armed with photos and notes, I filed a formal complaint against the HOA board. In my letter, I outlined the inconsistencies and accused them of discriminatory practices. I didn't just want to point fingers. I wanted accountability. My goal was to force the HOA to reevaluate its priorities and stop treating homeowners like enemies. The response came quickly. Margaret called me, her voice sharp and defensive. "What do you think you're doing, Mr. Thompson?" she demanded. "You're causing unnecessary trouble." "Unnecessary?" I shot back. "How is it unnecessary to ask for fairness? You've been picking on me for months while ignoring bigger violations right under your nose. That's not leadership. That's favoritism." She hung up without another word, but I knew I'd struck a nerve. The real showdown would come at the annual HOA meeting, where homeowners gathered to discuss community matters. This year, though, the atmosphere was electric. Dozens of residents packed the room, eager to see how the drama between me and the HOA would unfold. Some came to support me. Others were curious spectators. A few looked downright hostile, glaring at me as if I were the villain. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and faced the crowd. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady. "I'm not here to attack anyone," I began. "I'm here because I believe in fairness. The HOA says its rules are meant to protect property values and maintain harmony. But when those rules are enforced unevenly or used to single out certain homeowners, they do the opposite. They create division, resentment, and fear." I pulled out my folder filled with evidence and began showing photos of non-compliant homes. Each image drew murmurs from the audience. When I pointed out the red front door and the unauthorized flagpole, several people nodded knowingly. One woman even whispered loudly, "She's right. He's got a point." Margaret tried to interrupt, claiming that enforcement took time and resources, but her excuses fell flat. Her usual confidence wavered as more neighbors spoke up, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. For the first time, I saw cracks forming in her armor. By the end of the meeting, the tide had turned. A motion was passed to review and revise the HOA's rules, ensuring they were applied consistently and fairly moving forward. And in a surprising twist, Margaret resigned as president, citing personal reasons. As she left the room, heads bowed, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction, not because I defeated her, but because justice had finally prevailed. This victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt powerless against the HOA's iron grip. Willow Creek was changing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. The months following that pivotal HOA meeting brought a wave of change to Willow Creek Estates. It wasn't immediate or dramatic, no fireworks or marching bands, but the shift was undeniable. Slowly, the neighborhood began to breathe easier, like a weight had been lifted off its collective shoulders. For the first time in years, people started talking openly about what kind of community they wanted to live in, rather than just accepting the status quo. Margaret's resignation opened the door for new leadership. A neighbor named Linda stepped up as interim president of the HOA. Unlike Margaret, Linda was approachable and genuinely cared about finding solutions that worked for everyone. She organized town hall-style meetings where residents could voice their concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation. At one of these gatherings, I suggested simplifying the rulebook to focus on big-picture issues, like safety and property upkeep, instead of obsessing over paint colors and mailbox designs. To my surprise, the idea gained traction, and soon a committee was formed to rewrite the guidelines. As the rules evolved, so did the atmosphere in the neighborhood. Homes that had once been flagged for minor infractions were given grace periods to make changes, or in some cases, left alone entirely. The red front door down the street, still there, now seen as a quirky charm rather than a violation. The flagpole controversy faded into obscurity. Even our blue shutters, which had sparked this whole mess, became a symbol of resilience. Neighbors joked about them being legendary and occasionally stopped by to compliment how well they'd held up over time. But perhaps the most significant change was the sense of unity that began to grow among us. Before, the HOA's strict enforcement had created an invisible divide, pitting homeowner against homeowner in a race to avoid scrutiny. Now, people were friendlier, more willing to lend a hand or share a smile. Sarah and I noticed it during evening walks when neighbors we'd barely spoken to before would stop to chat. One family even invited us over for dinner, thanking us for standing up to the old regime. It felt good to know that our struggle hadn't been in vain. It had inspired others to speak up too. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with the changes. A small group of homeowners grumbled about the loosened restrictions, claiming the neighborhood was losing its uniformity. But even they seemed less vocal over time, especially as property values remained stable and the community thrived. The truth was, Willow Creek didn't need rigid rules to look beautiful. It needed happy, engaged residents who took pride in their homes. For Sarah and me, life settled into a rhythm we hadn't thought possible after all the chaos. We planted more flowers in the garden, added a cozy bench to the porch, and hosted barbecues for friends and neighbors. Our home finally felt like ours again, not just a house under constant surveillance. And while the memories of those stressful months lingered, they no longer carried the sting of resentment. Instead, they reminded us of how far we'd come. One sunny Saturday morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, I caught sight of Linda walking her dog past our house. She waved and called out, "Those shutters still look great, Matt." I laughed and thanked her, feeling a swell of gratitude. In that moment, I realized something. Fighting for fairness wasn't just about protecting ourselves. It was about building a better place for everyone. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made all the difference. Looking back on everything that happened, I can't help but marvel at how much has changed, not just in Willow Creek, but within me. When Sarah and I first moved into our little house with the blue shutters, we were wide-eyed and hopeful, eager to build a life in a neighborhood that seemed picture-perfect. What we didn't realize was that perfection often comes at a cost, and sometimes it's paid in freedom, fairness, or even kindness. The HOA saga taught us that standing up for what you believe in isn't always easy, but it's almost always worth it. Today, those blue shutters are more than just paint. They're a reminder of resilience. They've weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and they still stand proud. Every time I look at them, I'm reminded of the courage it took to challenge an authority that felt untouchable. It wasn't about being defiant for the sake of defiance. It was about protecting our right to live authentically in a space we called home. And while some neighbors initially saw us as troublemakers, many now view us as catalysts for positive change. That's something I wear as a badge of honor. The transformation of Willow Creek has been remarkable. Gone are the days when fear of fines or letters from the HOA dictated every decision homeowners made. Now, the community feels alive in a way it never did before. People personalize their homes without hesitation, adding flower boxes, painting front doors bold colors, or decorating their yards with quirky lawn art. Some have even started hosting block parties, turning quiet cul-de-sacs into vibrant hubs of laughter and connection. The neighborhood is no longer a cookie-cutter collection of houses. It's a tapestry of individuality, stitched together by shared experiences and mutual respect. Sarah and I have found ourselves at the heart of this newfound camaraderie. We've become friends with neighbors we barely knew before, including Linda, the new HOA president. She often jokes that she owes her position to us, though I think she'd have stepped up regardless. Her leadership style is collaborative rather than authoritarian, and under her guidance, the HOA has shifted its focus from policing trivial details to fostering a sense of belonging. Monthly meetings are less about enforcement and more about brainstorming ways to improve the community, like organizing park cleanups or planning holiday celebrations. Still, not every memory of those difficult months is tinged with triumph. There are moments I wish I could forget. The late-night graffiti, the whispered accusations, the feeling of isolation when it seemed like the entire neighborhood had turned against us. But even those painful memories serve a purpose. They remind me of how strong Sarah and I became during that time, leaning on each other when things felt unbearable. They also remind me why it's so important to speak up when something feels wrong, even if you're scared or unsure of the outcome. Now, as I sit on the porch watching kids ride bikes and dogs chase frisbees, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. For our home, for our neighbors, and for the lessons we learned along the way. Willow Creek isn't perfect, and neither are its residents, but perfection isn't the goal anymore. Instead, we strive for balance, rules that make sense, leaders who listen, and a community where everyone feels valued. And those blue shutters, they're staying right where they are.